Greetings. This video is going to be an extension of some topics from the recent past of how not only has the Zoom revolution greatly deviated the demand for real estate and certainly office real estate relative to what it was before the COVID-19 pandemic, and how there were so many skyscrapers in the world that were in process before the coronavirus pandemic and have been either stalled or repurposed or canceled and will have to be retrofitted for residential real estate eventually rather than the commercial real estate that many of them were initially devoted towards. There were 625 skyscrapers taller than 150 meters each that were in process as of March 2020. In process means they cannot cancel the project. The skyscraper is already partway built. And since it takes 3 to 5 years to build a skyscraper, these are projects that they eventually have to complete. They cannot just cancel it because it's already halfway built. But I've seen some new data in the last couple of days that corroborates certain observations that I've made and also provides a window into what the near future might look like for this particular situation, because the entire commercial real estate market is about to undergo a major technological disruption, and communication technologies like Zoom are at the forefront of that, and Zoom got a huge catalyst from the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. Video conferencing technologies such as Zoom have existed for at least 14 years before the coronavirus pandemic, but they never really caught on to a scale that could really have caused a major disruption, and it needed a catalyst event like the COVID-19 crisis to permanently shift behavior and for a critical mass of people to adapt around working with each other despite being in physically different locations. And office work may never return back to what it was before. And now we have some more data to look at. The website you see over here is a very useful resource, skyscrapercenter.com. It is different from the website I featured a few videos ago, which was skyscraperpage.com, and the two websites are useful in their own way. Skyscrapercenter.com provides this view that I have on the screen right now, which is by country, and you can see countries ranked by how many buildings they have above 150 meters, 200 meters, and 300 meters. And China, of course, is the highest by far, but we know the story over there. They built buildings 10 years before they were going to be used. And while the Western media makes fun of China for doing that, well, frankly, in California, they build something only 20 years after it is needed. Given the choice between those two imperfect solutions, I would rather side with the strategy of building things 10 years before they are needed than 20 years after they are needed. The United States is second, of course, and then a few other countries going down the list. And let's look at the United States, for instance. As we scroll down, this is what is interesting over here. The number of 150 meter plus buildings in existence in the United States. There are 825 that are completed and 66 under construction. Not bad. And this is after a fair number of cancellations because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the average age of a skyscraper in the United States is about 32 years. Not very old. Remember, New York City built the first true skyscrapers as far back as 1930, so 91 years ago. But the average age of these 825 buildings is about 32 years. By building enough buildings, they keep the average age contained. And as we scroll further down, you get into these very interesting charts here. It starts in 1970, and yes, a lot of Manhattan buildings were built long before 1970. The Empire State Building, for example, was 1930. But you see the construction trends for the entire country. The gray bars are the number of completions, and the blue dots are individual tall buildings. And a few outlier blue dots are, of course, the marquee skyscrapers that we have come to be very familiar with. And not a lot of people realize that in the 1990s, there was a severe stoppage of all skyscraper construction in the United States. And remember, this was before September 11th, 2001. In fact, after September 11th, 2001, it didn't take that many years for skyscraper construction to resume. And in the 2010s, we had a boom of skyscraper construction. A disproportionate share of that was in New York City itself, but even Chicago, Miami, Houston, etc. all saw some construction. And this is a website you can visit every now and then to see how things are tracking. For example, 2021 will still have about 38 completions despite coronavirus, because, as I said, anything that's completed in 2021 was obviously started long before 2021. It was probably started in 2017, 18, or 19. Even 2022 completions are pretty much baked into the cake. You cannot cancel something that was set to be completed in 2022 because it was already at least halfway built. Only by 2023 and especially 2024 can they begin to cancel projects, and that is what we see happening over here. And that'll go on for a few years as demand adjusts, because office supply is now in an extreme surplus and will be for the foreseeable future. And that is compounded with the surplus of retail real estate that was already happening from the e-commerce disruption that I speak about in other videos on this channel, including this one over here in this tag. And the only type of real estate that still is in shortage is residential. So more and more new construction has to be residential, despite all the zoning regulations and the NIMBY crowd that wants to create some unearned wealth by creating an artificial scarcity mentality. But that's just not going to fly anymore, because there's already a surplus of both retail and office real estate now, and that just is not going to go away. And a lot of that has to be repurposed into residential. It has to. Market forces demand it. But to what extent is this work from home revolution somewhat permanent? Well, sticking with New York City, I found this other very interesting data source over here. These are weekly turnstile entries in the New York City subway system. Now, not everyone in New York City goes to work via subway. Some people walk, some people take the bus. Some wealthy people take an Uber every day, but a large portion of people do go to work in the New York City subway system. And don't get me wrong, the work from home revolution is not the only reason that subway usage might go down in New York City. Some people have moved out of New York City altogether, meaning they're not keeping their job that used to be in New York City. They have left outright and have no further connection there. Also, some people are avoiding taking the subway because of the spike in crime that has been seen in New York City. And this is entirely due to government mismanagement, and some conspiracy theorists even say that it is deliberate, but I won't go that far. I will say it's just because of government incompetence. But this is stunning. Weekly turnstile entries in all of New York City was very stable 2015 until March of 2020. And it fell due to COVID-19, predictably, but the rise has been very, very muted, despite the fact that job growth has been much greater from the bottom relative to this. And Manhattan itself is swimming in money because of the stock market boom that is occurring due to other reasons that I speak about in other videos on this channel. So New York City, Wall Street is making more money than it's ever made before. And that has secondary and tertiary effects on the well-being of all of Manhattan, because restaurant workers, retailers, Uber drivers, everyone else is downstream from the wealth effect created by Wall Street people making more and more money. But weekly turnstile entries in all of New York City is down by 2/3. It's only 1/3 of what it was before the COVID-19 pandemic. And these other charts are also interesting. The Manhattan portion of the entire New York City share was remarkably stable, 54-55% for 5 years, no real deviation. It plunged, of course, and it's not rising back. So in addition to the fall in absolute turnstile entries, the Manhattan percentage of turnstile entries has gone down. And this is to be expected under a work-from-home revolution, because the higher-paid white-collar type employees are able to do their jobs from home more easily than those who do not work in a knowledge-based type of job. Scrolling down a little bit further, therefore you see Manhattan weekly turnstile entries. It was very stable for 5 years, and now it is down to just 1/3 of what it used to be. And this is after a lot of the COVID-19 lockdown and all these other problems have gone away. People are choosing to work from home because commuting via subway is a relatively poor experience. Many people commuted 1 hour each way to their jobs in New York City, but even if it's just a 20-minute commute, the subway is not a great experience, period. If you can do a portion of your job from home, some people are trying to do that. And what does that do to office real estate in New York City? And what does that do even to residential real estate in New York City? Manhattan is very expensive and always has been, but even 30 miles away, housing prices drop substantially, and people are gradually going to shift towards a lower cost of living type of location, person by person, because now they have the option to do so. They have been untethered from the requirement of commuting to a job every day. A commute is an onerous and draining experience, and it's not a 21st century experience, as I've explained elsewhere. So let's keep watching this. Maybe this is still a lag effect of the coronavirus lockdown and is not an indicator of how much of the work from home phenomenon is permanent. But if another year from now, July of 2022, if it is still only half of what it was pre-coronavirus, you can safely say that a huge portion of the knowledge-based workforce in New York City is now working from home and doing their jobs remotely. And if that's true in New York City, that's true the world over for the most highly skilled employees. And that's the beauty of this whole thing. That is why it is truly an atom disruption, because the higher up you are, the more flexible your job is towards things like working from home. It's the higher income people who can afford to do that. What does that do for real estate prices? So we're in the midst of another very substantial disruption that is remaking the cityscape altogether, remaking the relationship between corporations and their employees and between employees. And we are finally going to get to the system of being able to work with multiple people without being physically proximate to them. And that is a very dramatic and immediate increase in the standard of living of employees, for sure, because of all the associated costs that are now waived. Something to look forward to and something to think about and something to ponder in terms of your own investment exposure, because if you have exposure to office real estate and commercial real estate, that is something that you maybe want to think about, because this migration shift may still be only in the early stages of manifesting, and the conversion of office space into residential space will ultimately have to happen due to simple market forces. Quite a bit to think about right over there. Now, if you find this type of content useful, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. We cover a very wide variety of subjects on this channel, but they're all interrelated, as longtime viewers can attest. And thank you very much for watching.